Hello. Today I'm going to explain the forbidden experiment that shook psychiatry. The Rosenhan Experiment, in a way anyone can understand. The time was around 1970. The place was America. Back then, if someone was put in a mental hospital, they basically said this: "My life is freaking over." What does that mean? Just being put in a mental hospital could make people see you as dangerous, and your life could get wrecked in all kinds of annoying ways. In today's terms, it was like you can't get a job. You can't drive a car. You can't even vote. That kind of thing. Your life was basically stuck. If this were a game, it would be the kind of situation where you just restart from the beginning. In that kind of era, there was a psychologist named David Rosenhan. He said, "Can psychiatrists really tell sanity from insanity?" For example, a broken bone is easy. If the bone is sticking out, you just go, "Yep, that's broken," and that's it. But mental illness is different. Even if you open up someone's head, there isn't a little sticker inside saying, "Here is the crazy part." So doctors listen to what the patient says and make a judgment. Rosenhan wondered whether they were really judging correctly. So Rosenhan said, "Let's send healthy people into mental hospitals." Rosenhan decided to run an experiment using real mental hospitals. First, Rosenhan gathered some healthy people. There were 8 of them: health psychologists, doctors, a housewife, students, and so on, and he gave them only one instruction: go to the hospital and say you hear voices. In other words, they would sneak into mental hospitals as fake patients, and these actually healthy people would tell doctors, "I hear voices." The experiment was to see whether doctors could actually tell that these were lies. And what happened? Somehow, all 8 people were diagnosed with schizophrenia, or manic depressive illness, and got admitted to the hospital. Healthy people went to the hospital, said, "I hear voices," and boom, every single one became a mental patient. The hospital's score was 0 points. But the truly scary part started here. They had successfully gotten into the hospital, so the fake patients thought, "Experiment over," and immediately stopped lying so they could leave. "I don't hear voices anymore. I feel normal too." They honestly told the doctors that. From this point on, they were just healthy people. Normally, you would expect it to end with, "Oh, okay, you can go home." It did not end. Against expectations, the doctors would not let them leave. It was almost like, "Are you saying my diagnosis was wrong?" "No, you are mentally ill. You just don't even realize you're sick." That was the vibe. They kept treating them as patients. Not only that, they started deciding that everything the fake patients did was caused by illness. For example, the fake patients wrote notes about what was happening in the hospital for their records. The staff saw that and recorded it as pathological writing behavior. At that point, every elementary school kid doing summer homework should be hospitalized too. Even just walking down the hallway was interpreted as restlessness. Even just waiting for the cafeteria to open was treated like, maybe this is one of the symptoms. Then everyone waiting in line at a ramen shop is mentally ill too. In other words, once the label schizophrenic patient was stuck on someone, everything they did started looking like illness. For example, the same action, taking notes, is studying if a college student does it, reporting if a journalist does it, and observation if a researcher does it. But if someone seen as a schizophrenic patient does it, suddenly it looks like a pathological obsession or weird behavior. So the meaning is not decided by the action itself. It is decided by the assumptions of the person looking at it. In this way, when people slap a label on something, their bias gets stronger, and they can no longer see things properly. But inside the hospital, some people completely saw through them and said, "You're not actually crazy. You're probably a journalist or professor here to investigate the hospital." Who were those people? The real mental patients. What the psychiatrists failed to notice, the real patients seemed to understand. The best detectives were the patients, and the problem was not just the labels. Mental patients were being forced to endure treatment so awful it was hard to believe. For example, patients sometimes had their belongings searched without permission. Some were even observed while they were in the bathroom. On top of that, staff sometimes talked as if the patient wasn't even there, even when the patient was standing right nearby. To put it simply, they were not being treated like human beings. Even more shocking, the average time a doctor spent talking with a patient in one consultation was only 6.8 minutes. And yet doctors very easily said, "You are mentally ill." That was the diagnosis. Exposed to this awful stress, some fake patients apparently even started thinking, Wait, am I actually messed up? Some of them really seemed to start wondering that. Then the fake patients slowly began to realize something. In this place, proving that you were sane was basically impossible. No matter how much they insisted they were healthy, they were not believed, and they were stamped as mentally ill. In this situation, the hospital was basically a prison. The method the patients finally came up with to escape was this: admit that they were sick by saying, "I was ill, but now I'm better." Then the doctors decided the treatment is working and allowed them to leave. In the end, the shortest stay was 7 days. The longest was 52 days. Healthy people told one tiny lie and were treated as mental patients for almost 2 months. Rosenhan published these results, and the world of psychiatry went absolutely nuts. People started criticizing the diagnostic ability of psychiatric hospitals themselves, saying they couldn't even tell healthy people from mental patients. Then one doctor stood up and basically threw down a challenge to Rosenhan. "You just picked weird hospitals. At our hospital, we can spot the fakes." Rosenhan accepted the challenge and said, "Over the next 3 months, I'll send some fake patients, so try to figure out who's fake." The doctors were super confident. During that period, 193 patients were admitted. The doctors carefully observed them and made their judgments. "This guy is fake. This guy is real. This guy is an alien." In this way, the hospital judged many patients as possible fake patients. In the end, the hospital judged 41 people as fake patients and 42 people as suspected fake patients. When Rosenhan heard the results, he said, "Too bad. The correct answer is 0. Somehow, Rosenhan had not sent even one fake patient. As a result, the doctors were left going, and couldn't say anything. In the end, in the first experiment, they mistook healthy people for patients. In the second experiment, they mistook real patients for fakes. From these results, Rosenhan pointed out the terrifying power of labels. However, there are also strong criticisms of this experiment. The patients were intentionally lying from the beginning, so it's not surprising they were misdiagnosed. In the first experiment, the patients did lie, but normally doctors make diagnoses on the assumption that what patients say is true. For example, imagine a patient comes to the hospital and vomits blood right in front of the doctor. The doctor naturally considers the possibility of a serious disease. If the doctor thinks, maybe they're lying, that would actually be a much bigger problem. So it may be fair to say that the hospital's misdiagnosis in this experiment was only natural. Also, in more recent years, the credibility of the Rosenhan experiment itself has started to be questioned. Researchers who examined materials from the time and interviewed people involved found points where the paper and the testimonies did not match. Some participants testified, "We were not treated as badly as the paper says." That is what they said. In other words, the Rosenhan experiment may have been a study that raised an important problem but exaggerated its conclusion. That may be the case. Even today, opinions on the Rosenhan experiment are divided, but the point that people are influenced by labels and assumptions is still something worth thinking about, even half a century later. And that was the Rosenhan experiment explained in a way anyone can understand. Also, on this channel, I also explain the insane history of a treatment where the brain was cut in two and consciousness seemed to split. So check that out too. See you next time.